One.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Tim Barker, Business Development Director at English UK, and I am so happy to welcome you all to our ELT Conference. A very special welcome to those of you who are joining us via our live stream. This is a first for us, so a big welcome to you on YouTube. English UK is the UK's National Association of British Council accredited English language teaching centres. We represent and support over 350 teaching centres across the UK that, in a normal year, would welcome more than 500,000 students from around the world. Students who choose to travel to learn English in the UK do so much for more than just language learning. They travel for an immersive experience, learning about the traditions, history, and culture of the UK. By joining us today, you're all English UK record breakers. This 2021 ELT Conference is a landmark and record-breaking event for English UK. It's our first ever online ELT conference. We are welcoming 527 registered delegates. That's our largest ever conference. It's the first time that we're live streaming our plenaries to a global audience. With that in mind, I ask you to let us know in the chat box or the comments where you're joining us from and say hello in your local language. We are proud to be providing this innovative, challenging, brave program of content free of charge. None of this would be possible without the generous support of our conference sponsors: Cambridge Assessment English, Ensley Insurance, Language Cert, Macmillan Education, and Trinity College, London. In our first plenary, I loved how Silvana described the sessions today as a bit of a breather, a time to take stock and to focus on working together to create a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable industry once we rebuild following the devastation wreaked by COVID-19. Personally, I've been in this industry for more than 15 years, and the last couple of days have inspired and challenged me to think differently. That's a great way to spend a Wednesday and a Thursday. I'd also like to take a second at this point to highlight the huge amount of work that goes into putting a conference like this together. And our events team, Tom, Eleanor, and Siobhan, behind the scenes, have done an amazing amount of work to bring together these sessions and these speakers who have given up their time to contribute to everything that you've been learning about and thinking about over the last couple of days. You are all an inspiration to me and to many others. Today, the 22nd of April, is Earth Day. The rallying call of Earth Day is this: when life around the globe returns to normal, our world cannot return to business as usual. Right now, Joe Biden has 40 world leaders at a 2-day virtual summit ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference to be held in Scotland in November. President Biden has outlined an ambitious new target of cutting emissions by 50%. Biden has just tweeted that science is back. These targets, this news has made headlines all over the world. And as educators, we have a responsibility to bring climate action into our classrooms, to help students make sense of these headlines and understand their own role in the climate crisis. This is important and this is urgent. So that brings us on to today's session. And I am absolutely delighted that we are hosting this session. The first person that you're going to hear from is Colm Downes. And Colm's going to introduce the Climate Connection programme at the British Council. We're then going to hear from Christopher Graham, who will introduce the headline findings from the research in British Council's new Climate Action in Language Education project. Dianna Torosyan will then talk about the projects that led to the development of a special supporting course book. And finally, Colm will bring it all home with a discussion on why and how teachers can teach climate education. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Colm and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm in Jakarta. It's 9:30 at night here. I think it's 3:30 in the afternoon in the UK. So whether you're joining from the UK or watching the live stream and are joining us from around the world, good morning, good afternoon, good night. It's been an amazing conference so far. I joined a number of fantastic sessions earlier today. I was in Birmingham when Silvana gave that plenary, and it was really inspiring to see the latest, the update 5 years later, which was very special, and is a plenary I hope every teacher can get an opportunity to see. So thank you very much. My connection here in Jakarta is not very strong, and I've had some issues with it. So I'm going to be turning my camera off, but I'll be sharing my screen and showing you my slides. So I'm going to do that now. And Tim, could you just let me know that you can see my screen? I know it's not entirely full screen, but I hope you can see it clearly.
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
Okay. So I'm delighted to be here delivering this closing plenary along with Christopher Graham and Dianna Torosyan on behalf of the British Council. Before we get stuck into the presentation, I would like to start off by sharing some very brief context about the British Council's new Climate Action in Language Education programme. This year, the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, also known as COP26 in Glasgow in November. The climate talks will be the biggest international summit the UK has ever hosted, bringing together over 30,000 delegates, including heads of state, climate experts and campaigners to agree a coordinated action to tackle climate change. As COP26 president, the UK government is committed to an international collaboration with countries on the front line of climate change to inspire action ahead of COP26. And we are working together with the UK government to develop programming in the build-up to COP26 with a strong focus on inclusion, youth and civil society engagement. Our aim is ultimately to support the success and legacy of COP26 by creating opportunities for cooperation, dialogue and action in arts, education and science that address the shared challenge of climate change. Our global programme is called The Climate Connection. The website went live today, so you can have a look at that. This programme includes a specific strand focused on climate action and environmental sustainability in English language teaching, learning and assessment, which we have called Climate Action in Language Education. Through this programme, we've been working with a variety of different experts to develop the following: a series of 3 online modules designed to train teachers how to integrate environmental issues into language teaching, equip learners with the language skills to understand, discuss and engage critically with climate change issues. There are 3 modules with a total of 9 hours of learning, and you can register and find out more about those modules and by visiting the link below. In addition to our professional development training series, we've also been recording a new podcast series called The Climate Connection. We were planning to call it Meltdown with the words ELT coming out from Meltdown, but our brand team didn't allow that. So it's called The Climate Connection, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you. In fact, I'm just going to play you the trailer, so I hope you'll be able to hear this.
The Climate Connection. I think it's Nelson Mandela who said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
La conexión climática.
There's a large group of people who are often left out of the climate conversation. There's so much that we can be learning from indigenous communities around the world, for example, who, despite contributing the least to climate change, are facing some of the worst effects.
We ran a project called BYOB, Bring Your Own Plant. Unbelievable results. We were getting, ADHD cut by 3/4. Turns out it wasn't the kid that had the attention deficit. It was the environment that was deficiting their attention,
The Climate Connection, Climate Action in Language Education, a new 10-part podcast series from the British Council, available wherever you get your podcasts.
The Climate Connection.
Well, it will be available wherever you get your podcasts quite soon, but not just yet. So I hope you enjoyed that trailer.
The climate connection. I think it's
Sorry?
Nelson Mandela.
There we go. In addition to our online training modules and our podcast series, we have commissioned some experts to conduct some research into green initiatives from across the global English language teaching industry. The findings from this research will be used to publish a report highlighting global efforts being taken to make the global ELT sector greener, promote and facilitate environmental responsibility, and incentivize sustainability. And our global ELT sector report will be published in June. So you're going to hear more about this report and the initial findings as a sort of exclusive sneak preview from Christopher Graham in a moment. So this is a kind of brief summary of the things that we're doing as part of climate action in language education. This brings me on to our plenary today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Graham, one of our lead researchers. So Chris is going to kick things off by giving you a more detailed overview of the research that he's been doing, and he's going to share some initial findings. After that, we'll hear from Dianna Torosyan. Dianna, who is joining us from Yerevan in Armenia, will tell us a story about how she came to write a new environmentally focused course book called Our Planet. And finally, at the end of the presentation, I'll be coming back to share some practical tips on integrating climate content into English language teaching and why you should. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Chris, and the floor is yours, Chris.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much indeed. So Colin was speaking to you from exotic tropical Jakarta, and I'm in none of those things, Southeast London, but hopefully it will not affect the level of interest in what I say. Let me just put up some slides for you to take a look at. There we go. So as Colm said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research project that I've been working on now since around about Christmas time, actually, back end of last year. We started work on this, and as Colm said, the actual report will be coming out in early June. So I'm going to give you a snapshot of the processes we went through, but also one or two leaks, shall we say, of the results. It's probably not quite as exciting finding out who the next James Bond is going to be, but hopefully it's an ELT relevant leak anyway. Looking at structuring the research, the approach we took really was to look at two parallel channels, if you wish. One was the damage that our community as a whole, the ELT community to a whole, does to the environment and what we can do about it. There I'm talking about paper, plastic, flying, all the things that we do as a community, as does the rest of the world, that has an impact on the climate and some ways of mitigating, reducing that impact. But equally, and more interestingly from my point of view, I think, is the opportunities that we have as teachers, as educators, all of us. I'm sure all of you sitting out there are teachers or educators of some kind. The opportunities that we have to speak, to educate about climate change through the vast network. If you think about the global ELT community, it is probably unique. I don't know how many people are studying English at any one point in the world, and it was a British Council report that it's very, very large numbers. 1.5 billion I did read at one point. I mean, it's a huge number of people learning English at any one point. So that's a great opportunity, isn't it? So the two sides of the coin there, really. The research effectively had three strands. There was typical desk research, gathering data, identifying people to speak to. Essentially, the research revolved around the people there you can see in the little blue circles, the stakeholders in ELT. I put students at the top because they, in many ways, are the most interesting part of the research, but obviously all the other people who play the role in this great ELT machine. So we did some online surveys with teachers, teaching institutions, publishers and students, teenage students, through the British Council Teaching Teens website. And I'll share one or two of those results with you in a second. And we also did a series of interviews with stakeholders, approaching 40 interviews, I think we did, with people from each of those different stakeholders and sub-stakeholders as a way of gathering data. And the research brings all those things together. And it was very interesting how the things that people said in the interviews were very often borne out by data from other sources in the surveys. It's quite nice to see how things fitted together, and with one or two surprises. But some of you possibly sitting out there are unfortunate enough to have been interviewed by me at some point. But if you were, thank you very much. But as I say, it's given us a very interesting snapshot, and a global snapshot of where ELT and the environment are sitting at the moment. Let's look first of all, think about the students, because I said they're perhaps the most interesting. The survey went through about 2,500 students, and they were teenagers basically. They were 13 plus and under 18. Anyone else who did the survey outside of those age ranges, they were removed. We wanted it just purely to be a teenage survey. The first response there didn't particularly surprise me, I suppose. The second one did, and it made me very happy actually, because I somehow thought that students would separate ELT classes from climate change content, but they seem to be rather enthusiastic about the idea of engaging with climate topics and sustainability issues in their English lessons. So I think there's already a lesson there for us as teachers and for publishers, course designers. That's a nice little spark. The third point there, again, didn't particularly surprise me, that the source of data, the source of information around climate change in teenage world, being the father of one ex-teenager and one teenager, is social media. That didn't surprise me particularly, and obviously disappointed that schools are not seen as the source of that. But the second one, I think, is a really interesting little stat there, and there's food for thought there for all of us, I think. We spoke to teachers, about 1,800. Sorry, we surveyed about 1,800 teachers there, as you can see, in over 100 countries, and it really was completely global. And I've got some examples for you in a second. The first one I found very encouraging, that teachers generally feel that you have a role to play in this. Strong belief that climate change content, or strongly agree, climate change content should be embedded across course books. That seemed very positive. For me, the interesting ones were the last two. The fact that teachers generally feel they need training and support and are not getting it. So if you're a teacher educator, a director of studies, however your institution is organized, there's something to think about there. And possibly if you work for one of the large teacher training organizations, or one of the exam authorities or assessment authorities in terms of teacher education, there's something to think about there as well. I think certainly teachers want to do it, but they're not sure how to. I mentioned local communities because I think, as you'll see in a second, some of the most successful projects are those that plug into the local community. I'll talk later on about how, for me, the best way to engage with climate change in the classroom is not in the classroom, but it's actually outside in local projects. But the importance of the local community came up in throughout. It was something that came throughout both the surveys and the conversations that we had with people. Institutions. For institutions, that covers everything: private language schools, universities, government primary schools, secondary schools, any kind of organization that is involved in the teaching of English, all the various types of organizations involved in that. And that message at the last sentence there about things being bottom up, that was a common thread throughout the entire research. Initiatives are coming up, they're not coming down largely. It's groups of teachers. Some call themselves activists. Some call themselves eco-warriors, whatever people call themselves. It's very much an upward movement rather than a downward movement. And so that was born all the way through the research. It was a very common finding. We spoke to publishers, and I think it's fair to say that in terms of what you might call the supply chain, that is the way they source timber, the way they print, the way they package, we spoke to most of the large publishers and a number of smaller independent publishers too. They are making progress. There is definitely progress and awareness. As I say, whether it's dyes in printing, whether it's packaging, whether it's finally stopping sealing books in plastic, these things are beginning to change, and in many cases have changed. And there is some movement in terms of materials as well. I mean, it must be 20 years now that we've had a unit in a course book called Our Green Planet, Our Beautiful Planet or something, and that's been the way it's done. And students do unit 8, tick it, we've done the climate, let's move on to football, or whatever the next unit is about. But I think that's changing. There's an awareness now from publishers about the need to interweave or integrate climate issues throughout the entire course book, rather than just having a tick box. Right, we've done the climate, we'll do it again next year when we've got a level. And I feel that there is that sense of change, and things are appearing from the publishing houses now, which I think is really positive. I've got some little quotes here that I took from some of the surveys, and these are real teachers, real stories. And here's a lovely example of climate change education with a good physical connection, where the students went out, planted, and grew. And I think these were probably primary school children. I can't remember now. But the idea that we talk about ecology, we talk about nature, and then we go out and do it, and the children brought their plants into school. And that's been a very common thing, people engaging in practical activities around climate change outside of class. Whoops, sorry, going too fast. There's another one there, and this leads to a different kind of activity. That's activism, isn't it? They tell their relatives about it. The idea that students might go home to mum and dad and say, how many plastic bags have we got in the cupboard? Mum, why do you always leave the engine running when you pick me up from school? Why don't you switch the engine off? These kinds of activism that can be generated by an ELT lesson. And I find that really exciting, because I am certain there are dozens of these initiatives scattered across the world going on at any one time. And I think that's really interesting. I think climate change in ELT works, as I said, particularly well when it's embedded in the community. And Samira Becerra, as I said there, she's an inspector, a secondary inspector in Algeria. She's got 35, 36 schools that she looks after. And she has got a number of environmental projects working across her network of schools, but she has got support from all the local stakeholders, the Ministry of Education, the head teachers, parents, the local mayors. Everyone is involved. Now, these are community schools. These are schools in towns and villages across Algeria. And she has developed this network of climate awareness around the school, but driven by the fact that climate topics are integrated into the ELT lessons within the schools. And I think that's a really, really positive model to follow. The idea of getting everybody on board. The head teachers came in with a little bit of budget. The mayor gave public support, and so the thing grew. And that is really that is education happening before our very eyes, I think, isn't it? It's also, getting mum and dad involved. For me, that's a key part of climate education, as well as the broader community. Here's a nice one here. A project from a private school teacher in Turkey gave us. And I like the last line of the quotation there. Students signed pledges to reduce water usage. Students were horrified about how much water they actually use in their day-to-day lives, both for cooking and for washing clothes. All these things, creating clothing, really was quite a shock to them. So they signed pledges. So a low level, but nonetheless highly symbolic action generated by an English class. And I think that, as I say, that's English language education at its finest. It is education in the purest sense, I think, isn't it? So I find these little stories very, very satisfying. We have a number, more of them will be in the report when it comes out. I had a long conversation with Dalok. Dalok's a remarkable chap. He runs the Togo English Teachers Organisation in West Africa. And one of the big problems that they have across West Africa, as in many other countries, is plastic bags. Not only the fact that people just, when they finish with them, will tend to throw them, dump them in the street or throw them away, but the fact that people burn them to dispose of them, and also on occasions they burn them to keep warm. And burning plastic is never going to be a good thing, is it? Dalok, with the English Teachers Association, started to produce material that could be used in primary and secondary schools, addressing this very specific issue of plastic bags and disposal thereof. And it was fascinating what happened. As you can see in the second part of the quote there, he got teachers involved and he gave them support. He didn't just say, go out and teach this. He went to the regions and brought people from the regions into Lomé, the capital. They worked together on workshops and then went back to their regions and started delivering the teaching. But the interesting thing was there has actually, Delok says, been behavior change now. Plastic bag use is reducing. Not only is it's more than anecdotal, the fact that apparently now taxis in Lomé have a container in them where people, when they finish with plastic bags, can put them and the drivers will see that they are disposed of appropriately. So in other words, people are not just necessarily throwing bags out of windows or burning them. So he's actually seen behavioral change, which is really interesting. As I say, we're educators, and that there's education, as I said before, happening in front of our eyes, I think. The Moldovan English Teachers Association, I've personally been involved with for 2 or 3 years now, has set up this rather wonderful project, which is very important in Moldova because, as the Moldovans I know and having been there myself say, there is very little awareness of the climate crisis in Moldova. There was a recycling plant, apparently one recycling plant in Moldova. The government decided to close it because they didn't need it, which is interesting. But the English Teachers Association are not deterred by that, and they are really leading the fight in terms of climate education because there's no other climate education going on in schools there. So they set up a series of mini Zoom-based video conferences with teachers from around the world, where teachers submit a video, a presentation, or just a simple talk about a topic from their country. I visited one of the conferences recently. There were teachers with their students from, I think, around 7 or 8 different countries, and everyone spoke for a period of time. It was judged. They also have a video competition. They have an environmental art competition. Quite amazing. And this is real ground root stuff, because this is a teachers association in a country that doesn't have significant financial resources, but that's not deterring them. They're pushing forwards, and they're a real model, I think, of what can be done. And it's working, because you get this wonderful moment when you have a girl from India speaking to a boy from Greece, as I remember, about climate issues in their countries. And they were about 14, I suppose. And I found the whole thing very, very engaging and really a positive experience. Another project that maybe some people hear from International House is the International House Young Environmentalist Project, which is quite similar, but it's just within International House. But again, it's the idea of getting teenagers engaging. And I love the quote from Lucy Cottrell, Director of Innovation for IH World Organization there, when she says, the last bit, it doesn't mean a great deal to them. They don't understand the impact. But speaking to Lucy, she said that because the way this project is constructed, it's very youth-centric, very youth-driven, and they do start to engage, and they do start to understand the impact, and they do start to see the need for a solution. And by the way, it's all conducted in English. So again, these two really interesting projects, bringing young learners, teenagers together online to share problems, but also much more importantly, to discuss solutions. Totally another scale. We found this project at the University of Pennsylvania, who run this MOOC. The name is doesn't actually tell exactly what it is. Basically, it's a STEM MOOC. Oh, that's too many acronyms, isn't it? But anyway, it's a STEM MOOC. But the focus is around climate change. It's offered free of charge. It was paid for by the State Department, the US State Department originally, and now it's financed by the university itself. Most people, when it was conceived, most people thought it would be learners signing up. It's actually a lot of English teachers around the world signing up because they want to find out more about the language of climate change as well as the topics, so they can start to teach it themselves. And it's a huge scale, as you can see, more than 130,000 signing up, with nearly 80,000 getting towards completion. So it's a project on another scale. It's completely free, with a really a huge uptake. And two very different levels there with Moldova one side and MOOC on the other. Two different approaches, but both, I think, equally exciting and not only exciting, but give us ideas that we can take and adjust and use in our context wherever we happen to be in the world. And I think a nice summary of the whole thing was from Adam Matthews at Wimbledon School of English when I chatted with him about a month ago, talking about environmental content. He said this great thing. He said, juniors want things to be genuine. And that kind of ties in very nicely with the idea of small children bringing in something they've grown, older children perhaps going out, cleaning the beach, picking up plastic bags, teenagers going home and saying to mum or dad, as I said, oh, so many plastic bags, why don't we take this cloth bag next time we go to the market? They want things to be real, they want things to be relevant. And I think that quote covers everything, really rather nicely. So that's a taste of what you're going to get in the report. There's a lot more to it than that, and it will be out in the early part of June. If anybody has any questions, that's where you can find me. It's not necessarily too late if you know of a project in the world that you think is exciting, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you know of it through your networks. It's not too late to drop me an email, because the report is a monster. I keep adding things to it and taking things out. So I'm still very interested to engage with people who have, as I say, know of projects around the world that might be of interest to us. So if there is something, just ping me an email and I'll be glad to engage with you. And now I've got the very, very best type of case study, which is a living, talking, walking case study. So I shall stop sharing and I shall hand over to Dianna and I shall disappear. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Chris. So hello, everybody. I'm Dianna from Armenia, and currently I study at University College London at the Program of Education and International Development. So basically, this is my second master's degree, and I did my first master's degree at the American University of Armenia, and that's where we produced the book Our Planet. So I'd like to share my story, how we got the idea of producing Our Planet as a textbook, who helped us in this process, and also what's the impact of the textbook. So to do this, I think I'll go back to 2015, because that was the time, that was my last year at university, and I decided to do my course design project. And I basically wanted to design a textbook, and I wanted to teach English to school children. And that was the year that I also took the course called Natural Environment and Humans. And that course just shocked me, because before taking that course, I knew that people impact the environment negatively, but I basically did not know that we are just destroying our planet. And I did not know that my behavior, my personal behavior and actions could kind of be devastating to our environment. And so, being shocked by this course, I decided to combine the language component and the environmental component, and to produce a content and language integrated course. And my supervisor, Dr. Madhyara, who is one of the authors of the book, supported me throughout the process. So we got the initial version of the book. So when we got the initial textbook, one of the departments of the American University of Armenia, that's Agopian Center for the Environment, helped us to win a small grant from Norwegian Embassy. And with this small grant, we were able to pilot the project in 2 villages of Armenia. So we piloted the project in Hatsik village and also in Karagert village. And overall, we had 42 students who participated in the pilot project. And after we got the results of the pilot course, and it went a lengthy process of review and enhancement, and took about 5 years to get this book ready. And it was last year in 2020 that we got the book published. I basically have the book with me today. So we've got 600 copies of the book. We also have the online version of the book. If you'd like, I'll share the link at the end of my presentation. So this was a teamwork, because lots of people came together to produce these books. 2 departments of the university worked closely together. And the most inspiring and motivating part in this process was that all these people who worked on this book, they did not have any profit from it, but they just believed in the idea that we need to raise awareness about the environmental issues, because that's becoming more and more critical in our daily lives. So now I'd like to share some photos from our classes. I would generally divide them into 2 different types of activities that we have in the book. So we have in-class activities and we have outside outside activities or outdoor activities, I would say. So whenever we have classes in our class, in the classroom, so we not only focus on the environmental issue or the language component, but we also try to promote problem-solving skills and also improve teamwork among the students. For example, the students listened to the teacher who talked about the environmental issues, and they read about the environmental issue, and then we divided them into two groups, into 2 or 3 or 5 groups, depending on the number of the students. And then they, in their groups, tried to come up with the solution. They discussed the solution together, and they produced the solution as a drawing. And then they presented the drawing to the other groups. And the most interesting part is that different groups came up with different solutions, and it was very interesting to compare their solutions and see how differently they can think and how creative they can be in the classroom. Other than this, we've got outdoor activities. In the first one, you can see we had tree planting project. So to do this project, we got the support of the principals of the school. So they helped us to identify the site where we were planting the trees. We basically planted the trees in the garden of the school, so that when I'm not here or when the other fellow students who helped us to pilot the project are not there, students could take care of the trees and make sure that the trees grow. In the second picture, you can see that we did cleanup project, and it was interesting that teachers of the school and also parents joined us in this activity. We had some posters on the walls of the street encouraging and urging community members not to throw trash on the ground where it's not an appropriate place to throw the trash. And we have 6 this type of activities in the book, and I'd like to share also the other activity that's conducting the survey. So in this book, we also try to make the environmental issues locally relevant to the students. That is to say, in the first few classes, students conduct a survey in their neighborhood, and then they bring the survey results into the classroom. Together with the teacher, they discuss what issues they have in their district, in their community, and they prioritize the problem, the environmental issues, and they come up with solutions together and how each of them can solve that issue. So because sometimes environmental issues, basically they can differ from district to district, and it's very important whenever you are teaching a content like this, so that you can localize and contextualize and make it more relevant to the needs and the environmental issues that are present in that specific community. Other than this, we also created air pollution catchers. We tried to identify how much air is polluted in their regions. And also students collected used paper from their neighborhoods, and we gathered all that paper in the classroom. And after the course, together with the teachers, students take the used paper to recycling centers, and they see how paper is being recycled. And it's interesting because they see how in a recycling center, they can make new things out of old things. And this is something that really makes them motivated and inspired, because usually in public schools, they don't learn or they don't do hands-on activities like this. So now, very briefly, I'd like to share the structure of the book. So in the book, we have 3 units. We talk about the Earth's surface, then natural resources, and then the atmosphere. In the book, we try to teach the students that whatever they do locally, that impacts globally, and they have to have environmentally friendly behaviors. Other than the textbook that I showed to you, we've got 2 other accompanying materials. One of them is Teacher's Manual that helps teachers understand how they are going to teach the book. And we've got the teacher slides. This helps to make the content of the book visually appealing, because whenever the students and the teacher talk about environmental issues, they do not only see the pictures in the book, but we've got the pictures and videos specifically made for this book that students can watch and better understand what the problem is and how we impact the environment. So this much about the process of the book, how we designed it, how we got the idea. Now, what are we doing next? What are we going to do next? So we basically want to have this book in the public schools of Armenia, and we have applied for the Ministry of Education to approve this book as a supplementary material in the public schools. And I am happy to say that last week we got a very positive feedback and after it has been peer reviewed, and we are waiting for the approval now. And other than this, we also reach out to NGOs and foundations who teach English in different regions of Armenia so that they can use this book and also raise awareness of environmental issues at the same time. So if you are interested in this book and if you would like to explore it further, I've got the link of the book. You can find all the information about the book in that link, and we've got the supporting materials there. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And this much about our Planet book and our Planet book. And now, Colm, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Dianna. That was very inspiring. And many thanks to Chris for telling us about the initial results of the report, the research that you've done. We look forward to publishing the final report in June. So this brings me to the final section of our presentation. So again, I'm going to share my screen and turn off my video because of my connection. Let me do that now. Okay. So Tim, are you still with us? Can you still see my screen and hear me clearly?
Perfect.
Excellent. All right. So in this final section, I'm going to talk specifically about English language teaching and answer two sort of key questions. Why should English teachers integrate environmental issues into their teaching practice? And then secondly, how can they do this? And there's been a few talks on this earlier today, but that's what I'm going to finish with. So let's get started. Why should you care? Yeah. First of all, I think this is a crisis. At the heart of almost all international efforts to tackle climate change, it's to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping the global temperature rise this century to well below 2 degrees, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we don't manage this, then the future impact on the planet and our way of life is going to be catastrophic. Scientists predict that global temperatures will rise by between 1 and 6 degrees over the course of this century. My own personal wake-up call to the climate emergency was by reading this book by Mark Linus, in which he describes a degree-by-degree picture of the devastation likely to ensue unless we act now. It's terrifying. Greta, we couldn't have a presentation today without mentioning Greta. One of the things Greta has said is, I think she said this at Davos last year, I want you to act as if your house is on fire, because it is. In a crisis, everything we do should be geared towards ending that crisis. We shouldn't just be trying to live sustainably, we need to work sustainably too. There are different levels at which we can take action to fight global warming in our private lives at home, through conversations and actions with friends and family, but perhaps the biggest impact we can make is at the level of the communities we are members of. And for most people, a significant community is our place of work and wider professional network, our learners and fellow colleagues who make up the community that we spend a significant amount of time with, who we can influence and who influences us. So first of all, I would say, because it's a crisis. Secondly, because climate education is critical in tackling the climate crisis, particularly improving girls' education. Education is an essential element of the global response to climate change. It helps young people understand and address the impact of global warming, encourages changes in their attitudes and behavior, and helps them adapt to climate change related trends. Climate change education, or CCE, is an essential component and a catalyst for responding to global climate change. The importance of climate change education has been increasingly highlighted at the international level. The UN Sustainable Development Goal 13, Climate Action, calls upon all countries to integrate climate change education throughout the education system, to mainstream it in national education policies, across the curricula and assessment, not just in science, but all subjects, and this includes English language teaching. Schools in several countries have started educating students on climate change, but as it's a relatively new addition to the curriculum, not all are doing so effectively. The Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty on climate change adopted by 196 parties at COP21 in 2015, includes a commitment to enhance climate change education. But as Youth Envoy Jayasma Wickramanayake states, in many parts of the world, this still isn't happening. So there are two problems here. Not enough schools are doing it, and even those that are might not be doing it very well. This is an old article by the Guardian newspaper, but it is still relevant today. In this article, it states that many attempts to educate the public and our children about climate change have relied on scare tactics that focus on superstorms, massive floods, and ominous weather patterns to generate fear. But fear can actually inhibit the desire to learn more and take more action, particularly in young people. What's clear is that change to education curriculums is coming, and the demand will only continue to expand as the effects of climate change progress. Some people will say, well, that's all well and good, but I just teach English, but why me? Why English teachers? Well, first of all, I would say, because it is preparing our learners for the future, and that is what teachers do, all teachers, including English teachers. In language teaching, we talk about 21st century skills, such as critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity, but these must include climate education. Supporting students today in learning about climate change and providing the opportunity to explore and consider climate solutions will increase the resilience of our society, as well as our competitiveness in a green economy. Young people will have to navigate a world deeply impacted by climate change, so they need to learn about that, not just the science of it, but the social and economic consequences. We need to equip learners with the language skills they need to understand, discuss, and engage critically with climate change issues and promote solutions to local and global environmental problems. A few years ago, Rosalind Appleby wrote, all those in English language education need to consider how we might contribute to building a safer and more sustainable world, and how English language students, wherever they may be, might be encouraged to analyze, understand, and act on environmental problems. However, it is only now that it is really starting to happen. But you can get started today. While it will take some time for climate change education in schools to become the norm, for course books and curricula to adapt, there are some recurring themes that are frequently brought up when discussing how to teach climate change issues effectively. So, how can you integrate climate change education into your English teaching? I'm going to give you 8 suggestions. These suggestions have come from many different experts in the field. Especially, I'd like to credit Owen Llewellyn and Ben Crompton and Melitza from ELT Sustainable, but also from English teachers around the world who are already taking action themselves. My first tip is simply to raise your own environmental awareness. While it's important to stress that you do not need to be a climate expert. I don't think any of us are climate experts as English teachers, but it will be helpful to become more aware of your own climate and environmental literacy. At the same time, enabling your students to raise their own climate and environmental literacy. It may well be that your students know more than you, and this is fine. You can encourage your students to share what knowledge they have about local and global environmental issues. Perhaps your students could give you some tips on how to be a greener teacher. I'm a big supporter and advocate of content and language integrated learning, CLIL. And I know students find it motivating when they finish an English lesson, having developed their language skills and discussed and learned something new on a topic relevant and interesting to them. This brings me to my second and third tips. These are recommendations which I would make to all English teachers of all levels and topics. However, I think they're especially relevant when it comes to the environment. At the moment, the majority of international course books and ELT materials, when there is a focus on the environment, the focus is often on global environmental issues, which are far away from our learners' lives and concerns. Earlier today, Ben Crompton from ELT Sustainable talked about this. He memorably called the problem the polar bear problem. In order to motivate or engage your students, it's really important to personalize the lesson, discuss environmental problems and solutions which are relevant to your learners. I think it's also extremely important to be careful when you select images that you use. We often use images, especially at the moment as we're teaching online. An organization called Climate Visuals, they had a slide, you can see here from their Twitter post, it said, climate change has an image problem. Climate Visuals recommends that when using images, we should show the human impact of climate change and not abstract images of melting ice caps and polar bears or sunlit wind turbines. I think the same thing is true when teaching. So, personalize the course book, create your own lessons relevant to your students, and make use of free materials and lesson plans already online. There is a huge amount of high quality material, both, well, especially for the non-ELT sector, I would say at the moment. And you can use that and adapt it and use it with your students. My fourth tip is directly inspired by Owen Llewellyn, which, you know, the founder of ELT Sustainable, which Owen has been running since 2012. Owen rightly makes the case that many teachers only have time and space to teach the course book. And if the course book doesn't include climate change issues or only superficially, then these issues are not going to be taught. Students could spend thousands of hours of contact time in the classroom and only hear about environmental issues or discuss the effects of climate change in a handful of them. Therefore, and in Owen's own words, it's necessary to hack the curriculum or ninja your environmental content into your existing lessons. Or to put it another way, to put on your green tinted spectacles when you're planning your lessons. When you do this consciously, it's often quite easy to find the environmental angle to any lesson. For example, a lesson on transport could easily become a debate about the most environmentally friendly ways to travel. A lesson about shopping could include a discussion about consumerism and sustainability. So the next time you're planning a lesson, put on your green tinted spectacles. Tip number 5 is pretty self-explanatory, but obviously where it's possible for you and your students to get out into nature and the real world, this is clearly a good thing, especially at the moment when we're all stuck at home and behind our screens. And if you can't get out into nature, then perhaps you can bring some nature into your school, perhaps growing plants or fruits or vegetables, which your students can be responsible for. Of course, language learning and language practice don't only take place in the classroom. Whilst teaching online, we've all got used to asynchronous learning and setting students tasks to do in their own time. When we go back to the classroom, this should continue. We know that students are deeply passionate about the environment and making a difference. So why not design some learner-centered projects for them to do between lessons? I think Diana just gave some fantastic examples in her talk. For example, you could ask them to find someone in their community, somebody tackling climate change in their own way, and your students could make a short film about them. And then afterwards, the students could present their films and you could give feedback on their English language performance. I think it's very important that you are to remember that you are not alone here. If you're here today for this webinar, it's a sign that you are already doing many of these things as a teacher. I myself, as I developed as a teacher, learned most in getting tips and ideas and resources through being part of a community. This was whether this was in my school, or at an international conference like IATEFL. These days, with the internet, you can also easily be part of a global community of practice. Just under 2 years ago, on the 18th of May, 2019, Daniel Barber, one of the founders of ELT Footprint, made a climate emergency declaration on behalf of the ELT community at the Innovate ELT Conference in Barcelona. This led to all kinds of conversations online and off. You may have been part of those conversations. One of the things that emerged was the idea of creating a shared online space where ELT people of all walks of life could meet up and share ideas, make plans, and support each other in their endeavors to make our profession greener and more environmentally responsible. 1 week later, on Friday, May the 24th, coinciding with a massive global climate march, the ELT Footprint group was launched. The ELT Facebook group now has 3,500 members. If you haven't joined already, then I encourage you to join today and be part of this global community. Here in the UK, you also have ELT Footprint UK, run by Christopher Edchells and Helen. Another global community you could join is IATEFL's global, well, you could join IATEFL, and within your membership of IATEFL, there is a special interest group called GSIG, or if you're in America or linked to TESOL, they have their own special interest group called Social Responsibility. And if you're really keen and highly motivated, but perhaps you could set up your own special interest group or your own community of practice in your school or in your country. Diana wrote a whole course book. If she can do it, you can do it. Being part of a community of practice is about sharing, and it's also about learning. So continue to take advantage of professional development opportunities. So these are my 8 top tips for English teachers to act now. Climate change education is about changing the default. It's about our day-to-day assumptions, our decisions and actions being framed in an environmental context. So on April 22nd, World Earth Day, I would like to finish this presentation, the closing plenary of English UK's conference, by repeating Daniel's call for action. This is a climate emergency, and the time to act is now. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation, and I'm the technical lead for climate action in language education. I have put a link to the slides on the screen, which I'll leave up for a moment. And I hope that you are able to access them. And then I'm going to hand back over to Tim. We have finished within schedule, I hope.
Perfect timing. It's like if the professionals that you are. That was brilliant, Colm, and Diana and Christopher as well. I don't know about everyone else, but I feel inspired to go out and do some activism and yeah, it's just a great call to action there at the end for all of us. I personally particularly like what all of you said about getting students out there and outside. I seem to remember a stat a few years ago from that 3/4 of British children spend less time outside than prison inmates, which was doing the rounds. And I think that's one of the problems that we have, right? Let's get people out there and into nature and working on it. Lots of great comments coming in, inspiring, interesting. Thanks to all of you. Important information. I think that's absolutely right. And I'm just looking through some comments. There's been some great ones from Maria. 20 years of teaching, and after 41 years of teaching, rather. Sorry, Maria. Having students interested in what concerns the environment, doing projects. Great to hear, and great to hear that so many people are inspired and interested by this. That's it from us. That's the end of our ELT Conference 2021. 2 incredible days of I think, brave and inspiring and interesting conversations. If you did miss anything today, then all of these sessions are recorded and will be available on the English UK website to everybody. Please share the links as well. As was mentioned by all of our panelists today, these are very important topics. We want this message to get wide. Share it widely with your colleagues and across your teams, across practitioners, so that more people can hear these important ideas. And hopefully next year we'll see you again. I'm sure that we've all got a lot of thinking to do about whether we all go back to a face-to-face conference or whether we'll see you back here again online in another year. There's certainly been a lot of advantages to us in being able to welcome speakers from Armenia, from Indonesia, from Southeast London, all to the conference today, and many, many more. So again, thank you. Unfortunately, you get the last word from me, but it is a big thanks, and I hope you all enjoy some much deserved rest and recuperation today and the rest of this weekend.